What traces does the process of dehumanization leave behind? Physical division of territories and millions of broken psyches decades later. The structural destruction persists. Historical records confirm this long-term territorial rupture. The Berlin Wall stood for 10,316 days. It formed a physical manifestation of a fractured continent. The damage extends beyond basic infrastructure into multi-generational psychological trauma. Data maps out the timeline of systematic violence. It began at the Polish border. It culminated inside a concrete bunker in Berlin. Between these points lies Broniki, a site of mass executions. Clinical analysis reveals a predictable psychological pattern. The doctrine of hate constitutes a documented cognitive framework. It requires the systematic dehumanization of the opponent. Once a population internalizes this, massacres become standard operational procedure. The threshold for violence permanently drops. This cognitive shift dismantles the society that implements it. Psychological damage does not dissipate when active combat operations conclude. Descendants inherit physiological responses to historical stress. The fields of Broniki absorbed the physical evidence of the executions. Surviving populations across the continent faced decades of cognitive dissonance alongside untreated collective trauma that defied standard psychiatric interventions. The trauma lasts for generations. 7 million lives vanished for a territorial doctrine. The outcome of this campaign was officially documented in a ruined Berlin. On the 8th of May 1945, German representatives sat at a wooden table to sign the instrument of unconditional surrender. The sharp scratch of a steel pen against paper broke the silence of the surrender hall. This signature formalized the territorial collapse of the state. Instead of the promised Lebensraum expansion across Eastern Europe, the nation fractured into two occupation zones administered by the victorious powers. 7 million dead due to expansion. This loss represented approximately 10% of the German population recorded in the 1939 census. More than 5 million soldiers died across various front lines, leaving their bodies in the frozen trenches of the Soviet Union. The domestic front experienced identical devastation when the conflict recoiled back to its geographic origin. Allied strategic bombing operations leveled residential blocks and logistical hubs across the country. The final count of civilian casualties under the bombs reached exactly 2 million. Where did commanders formalize the order for total destruction? At 33 meters depth, inside a metro station. Rewind 3.5 years before the collapse, to November 6, 1941. The rules of combat changed completely. Stalin stood on the Mayakovskaya platform. Concrete vaults arched overhead. Dim lamps cast shadows. His voice echoed from the loudspeakers. 33 meters of earth blocked the Luftwaffe. Heavy aerial bombs could not penetrate the station. The speech bypassed mere encouragement. It formed a demographic death sentence, a formal doctrine of extermination. Moscow accepted the challenge from Berlin. Stalin declared the new protocol. He spoke. If they want extermination, they get it. Microphones captured the acoustics. Cables routed the audio signal. Radio transmitters broadcast the frequency. Receivers picked up the static. The sound reached the frozen trenches. Temperatures dropped to -20. Soldiers listened in the snow. The directive operated on binary logic. No mercy, no prisoners, no pity. Every occupier must die. Shoot them down to the last man. Local skirmishes triggered deliberate slaughter. Individual actions shaped official policy, blood for blood. A strict calculation of death. The decree mandated complete annihilation. Staff officers drafted the paperwork. Typists processed the documents. Telegraph operators tapped the final coordinates. Signalmen routed the copper cables. Radio officers transmitted the extermination directive to every artillery battery and infantry battalion across the entire Eastern Front. Official laws of war disappeared, yielding to primitive mathematics requiring one execution for another. The Moscow directive landed on a prepared foundation, accelerating a chain reaction of retaliation between opposing units. The Geneva Convention of 1929 mandated humane treatment for all captured combatants. Instead, field formations encountered naked prisoners shot at close range during the Broniki massacre. The mechanics of escalation operated through a precise cycle of documented incidents and authorized reprisals. Liquidations of Soviet civilians by Einsatzgruppen detachments triggered immediate counter-executions from regular Red Army forces. Typewritten execution reports passed directly from hand to hand between Wehrmacht officers at headquarters. Division commanders read the names of dead German prisoners, utilizing these dispatches to mandate new violence. Every recorded incident generated formal justification for subsequent actions, removing remaining tactical restraints. The cycle accelerated. Division staffs stopped accepting surrenders, establishing mutual hatred as a daily combat parameter. Did combat conventions just disappear? Witnesses confirmed the tactical shift. What did they actually see? The standardized liquidation of 180 stripped prisoners. The execution sequence followed a set order. A Soviet political commissar stood before the troops. He delivered a short speech. The narrative focused on hatred. He finished his final sentence. Orders were given. Machine gun muzzles were already in position. They opened fire. The men tried to flee. Bullets crushed their spines. The executioners escalated the firepower. Artillery crews moved into position. They aimed direct. Unarmed men faced close-range artillery. A standard 45mm anti-tank gun fired high-explosive fragmentation shells. The blast mechanics were exact. The lethal radius spanned 15 meters. The physical shockwave slammed into the dense group of bodies. Shrapnel shredded soft tissue. Bones shattered. Blood covered the grass. The clearing became a tactical slaughterhouse. Humanitarian rules vanished. Primitive revenge drove the process. This physiological reality was documented later. The bodies were left alone. Men crawled out. They survived. The exact count of naked soldiers who managed to escape from under the mangled mass of bodies was 7. Who did the dead silence conceal on July 2, 1941? 153 mutilated bodies of elite Wehrmacht soldiers. The troops expected military glory after swift victories across Europe. Instead, they found naked corpses scattered in a Ukrainian clover field near Broniki. In 1941, German propaganda collided with the physical reality of the Eastern Front. The psychological shock shattered superiority complexes forged since 1933. When Hitler took power, troops absorbed racial doctrines alongside tactical training. The army had just marched through Poland and France. The Wehrmacht commanded massive tank divisions and unchallenged air support. Soldiers saw themselves as invincible conquerors. A standard German infantry company held roughly 190 men. The slaughter wiped out almost an entire combat-ready formation. The unit ceased to exist. Rules of engagement vanished. They took no prisoners here. How did the field look after the Wehrmacht counterattack on July 2, 1941? Investigators found crushed bones, deep bayonet wounds, and 0 uniform elements. A detailed inspection of 165 bodies erased any remaining illusions among the arriving personnel. Soldiers stepped through the blood-soaked grass under the blinding summer sun. Medical teams documented the precise mechanics of the execution. The naked bodies presented a consistent pattern of trauma rather than standard combat injuries. Forensics recorded severe blunt force impact from rifle butts, resulting in multiple shattered bones. Sharp force injuries, primarily deep bayonet thrusts, ruined the torsos of the victims. 153 infantrymen and 12 officers lay scattered across the dirt. This total count of 165 fatalities equaled the complete destruction of a standard German infantry company of that era. Every single corpse lacked field gear, tunics, trousers, and footwear. The deliberate removal of clothing served a specific psychological function in the aftermath of the ambush. It stripped the dead of their military identity and reduced combatants to anonymous remains. Removing the uniforms transformed a tactical engagement into a method of humiliation. Physical evidence pointed to close-quarters execution rather than artillery fragmentation. Investigators noted the complete absence of identification tags, rank insignias, and standard-issue marching boots. The Wehrmacht command received the forensic data by that evening. Left under the glaring heat, the pale corpses remained on the Ukrainian soil without boots or military insignia.
Captain Keller led his battalion into the open terrain. Orders demanded immediate closure of the Cleven Gap. 24 hours before the mass grave discovery, these men marched in the columns of the 35th Infantry Regiment. It was the morning of July 1st, 1941. At exactly 6 in the morning, the unit moved out. The infantry columns advanced across the open Ukrainian fields, expecting to find only disorganized and retreating stragglers. Instead, they encountered a coordinated counterattack. 15 Soviet tanks struck directly from Orzhiv. They hit the right flank. The armor shattered the German marching formation in under 3 hours. German military doctrines strictly required the deployment of 37mm PaK-36 anti-tank guns to repel enemy armor. Keller's infantry lacked this weapon support at that exact moment. Soviet tanks rolled forward. The columns collapsed into isolated pockets. Men dug shallow foxholes. Soviet treads crushed the outer defenses. The infantrymen fired back with their MP-40 submachine guns. 9mm bullets bounced off the steel plating. The German troops expended their remaining rifle ammunition. Metallic clicks of empty Kar 98K bolts echoed inside the dirt pits. Supporting artillery fire never arrived. Radio connections failed. The tactical layout broke down. The unit found itself defenseless against the tracks. They had no mines. They had no escape routes. The armored encirclement destroyed their combat capability. Resistance ended. 180 German soldiers raised their hands above the gunpowder smoke. Where did the Cleven Gap originate? Rivne transport hub fell too quickly. The rapid capture stretched communication lines to the breaking point. The network snapped. Keller's battalion took direct tank fire. The 25th Infantry Division headquarters miscalculated. Operational speed bred tactical disaster. It was late June 1941. Infantry troops marched 200 kilometers eastward. Supply trucks lagged. 1 week of continuous advance created huge gaps in defense lines. Ammunition deliveries stopped. Logistics simply failed. Forward units lost radio contact. Flanks remained exposed. Retreating Red Army divisions analyzed this flaw. They did not disintegrate. Commanders shifted their axis. Retreats halted. Soviet infantry reversed direction. Red Army soldiers regrouped to strike the dangerously thin supply lines across the occupied zone. Tens of thousands of civilians stood at the uneven edges of old bomb craters during the first weeks of June 1941. The Soviet soldiers at Broniki retaliated with extreme prejudice because execution squads operated directly behind the advancing German regular army. Einsatzgruppen units moved tightly behind the combat formations to execute immediate clearance operations across the newly captured territories. Following explicit directives issued by SS Command, they targeted populations in Ukraine and Lithuania, forcibly rounding up citizens near forest perimeters. Operatives from Einsatzgruppe A and C marched the gathered captives toward pre-dug anti-tank ditches. Machine gunners secured overlapping fields of fire and methodically emptied their ammunition belts into the crowds without judicial trial. Adjacent detachments simultaneously burned surrounding villages to the ground to eliminate potential insurgent shelters. The continuous metallic rattling of Einsatzgruppen machine guns echoed through the timber, eventually sounding louder than the artillery barrages firing from the front lines. Thick black smoke from the mass execution sites rose directly behind the advancing panzer divisions. Soviet artillery detonations fractured the Berlin underground perimeter. Plaster cracked. The heavy scent of pulverized concrete dust saturated the sealed air filtration system. The trajectory downward to this specific bunker originated directly with SS clearance units. Rules were deleted.
The Broniki incident registered as the first critical structural fracture of the Eastern Campaign. Retaliation matched the exact calculated metric of the initial ideological purge. Debt required payment. The complete cycle of annihilation commenced with the primary invasion order. German forces officially launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941.
How did 3,000 SD personnel control millions? Through approved liquidation lists. Einsatzgruppen entered the captured cities. The names were pre-printed in Berlin. These were SS and security police units. They brought no heavy artillery. They brought files. SD officers opened leather briefcases. They pulled out printed sheets. Typewriter keys clicked without pause. Administrators processed the death quotas. They checked detainees against columns. 3,000 men operated here. They formed a fraction of the Wehrmacht, yet they executed Berlin's main goal. 4 specific task forces divided the continent. Task Force A moved north. Task Force C entered Ukrainian territories. Murder became an administrative tool. No battlefield clashes occurred here. House hunts replaced frontline combat. No one escaped. They hunted Jews. They hunted Communist Party members. They targeted suspected guerrilla forces. Women and children faced immediate execution. The administration of death worked. It required precision. It required speed. Documents dictated every fired bullet. Decisions originated in quiet Berlin cabinets. Supreme decrees bypassed international law. Regional execution sites operated efficiently. Identities dissolved into pure statistics. The folders closed. The official extermination directives distributed across the entire Eastern Front targeted exactly 4 approved categories. Wehrmacht officers observed the laws of war in France, yet received explicit orders to execute suspects without trial on the Eastern Front. The legal foundation for those execution lists was a complete rejection of the Geneva Convention. Adolf Hitler authorized these parameters of engagement for the invasion commencing on June 22nd. Black ink stamps from the High Command validated documents that stripped enemy populations of all legal protections. The directives classified Soviet demographics, specifically targeting Slavs and Jews as Untermenschen. Every soldier of the Wehrmacht became an authorized agent of a demographic eradication program. Under this new framework, standard military rules ceased to apply, causing 3 million captured Soviet soldiers to perish in makeshift camps. The German command deliberately removed military courts from civilian matters in these specific regions. No field tribunals existed to prosecute German personnel for actions in the occupied territories. 134 main divisions crossed the border simultaneously. Physical enforcement of those orders started immediately. Watch hands hit 3:15. June 22, 1941. Deafening artillery roared. Millions of shells detonated. Eastern skies burned. Operation Barbarossa began. 134 main and 73 reserve divisions moved simultaneously. This first wave contained over 3 million men. More than 3,000 tanks idled. 700,000 horses pulled heavy cargo. Logistics chains stretched for kilometers. Supply trains delivered fuel. Steel tracks crossed dirt paths. Berlin committed all available national resources into a massive logistical gamble to destroy the Soviet Union in a single summer campaign. Steel wedges moved forward. Why plan total destruction? For agricultural lands. The 3 million men crossing the border merely executed the directives for Lebensraum. Economic staff calculated the exact calories required to sustain the Third Reich. Operations mandated the extraction of 7 million tons of grain within the first year. Officers drew extraction zones across the fertile black soil regions on topographic maps. Logistics staff categorized Ukraine and Belarus exclusively as raw material appendages, planning intentional starvation to secure the entire agricultural yield. Eliminating communism provided the necessary ideological cover for territorial expansion.
Russia offered thousands of hectares of wheat fields. Supply battalions followed the tanks to seize the crops. Infantry cleared the territory. The grand design for Eastern living space shrank to the dimensions of a concrete bunker in Berlin.